My guest today is Mitli Southey. She is the founder of Circle School. Mitli's been teaching and facilitating circles and retreats and courses since 2016. Mitli brings a unique blend of practical, ethical, and mystical to guide well-being practitioners to remember the ancient practice of circles and to reimagine them to hold enriching gatherings in these evolutionary times. And I think I've seen you call it these wild times as well. Mitli is also a former lawyer, a fellow midlife mother living in the gorgeous Devon County of England. I am exceptionally excited to have her on the Second Spring podcast today to share how circles can help empower us midlife women to enjoy a healthy, connected, and fulfilling life, and so much more. Welcome, Mitli. Thank you so much for saying yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here.
I love seeing you. I love that we met in person, and I was so privileged to be part of one of the retreats that you held in person last year in just near where you live in Devon.
Yeah, I can't believe it was nearly a year ago, wasn't it? We started, I keep getting these little memories up now that Catherine and I just started talking about it and sharing about it this time last year, getting
Yeah.
ready for September. So yeah, it was a privilege to meet you. Thank you for coming to that.
Of course, it was one of the few things that I said yes, even without knowing exactly what I was saying yes to. Did I tell you this? I um I saw a blurb. I talked to my friend Gian, who did a little something during the retreat as well. And then we met on Zoom, where you told me a little bit more about the retreat, even though you didn't really have to tell me more. I was already in. And then we had some magical days together
Yeah.
as a group in circles and connecting.
Mm.
Midley, I would love for you to start us off with just sharing a little bit about you, your journey, kind of from the beginning, if you can, where you grew up and some big moments in life that led you to be where you are today.
It's such a huge question, isn't it, at
We will
this
be here
stage
all
of life?
day. We will be here all day. Thank you for listening, podcast listeners, for 8 hours. No,
I'll pick out some highlights. But
perfect.
I think in terms of where I grew up in the UK, in England, and I had a childhood that was both in the country, we were in East Anglia, and I was at a boarding school, and also my parents ran a business in London. So I spent time in both environments, which was wonderful and has also cultivated a love of both environments within me. So it's quite an interesting, I love to spend time in the city, but I'm also very, very happy out. So where we live at the moment in Devon, out on the wilds of Dartmoor. And then I went to university to study law. And I had an albeit quite brief legal career in litigation and then in compliance with the Law Society of England and Wales. And I think I've always been a seeker. My questions have always been asking, what's the purpose? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? And that was a really strong driving question. I had quite a life-changing experience when I was 18. I was involved in a car accident, which was very tragic and fatal. And so there were a lot of things to process through my 20s. And I think it was about just after my 30th birthday, I decided to take a career break. So I resigned from my job and did this idea of going traveling, to take a year out, to find if there was another meaning to life that I hadn't yet discovered. And that's what I did. And I ended up going to Australia, where I have dual nationality. So I had family to stay with, and I didn't come back for 12 years. So I
Wow.
stayed in Australia. I retrained in various modalities, well-being modalities, and found a real love for food and food as medicine. So originally started studying nutritional medicine and then trained as a food coach and then culinary nutrition expert. Worked in health food shops, organic food shops, and then met my partner, Simon, and we moved to a little town in the southwest of Western Australia. It's one of the most remote places that you can probably travel to. It's about 6 hours southwest of Perth, which is one of the remote, I think it's the most remote capital city.
It is.
So we went all the way down there, which is absolutely beautiful part of Australia. I loved it from the first time I'd visited it and always knew I wanted to live there. So we packed up and moved down there, and within quite a short time I became pregnant, which was wonderful. And then when River was 6 months old, we opened an organic store and cafe there. So kind of bringing, Simon is a hospitality professional, and I had hospitality experience because that was the business my family were in, and then bringing that together with my love of food and nutrition and having retrained in that. So we created a beautiful organic store and cafe, which we ran for 5 years. And during that process, I think we were a couple of years in. So we opened that when River was only 6 months old. So it was really hard. It was really challenging. We sort of went from being partners to being business partners, parents, and a lot fell away. So there was really no time for anything other than, how do I keep this baby alive? And how on earth do I run a bricks and mortar business with my partner? And that was actually how I came to circles. I'd been to my very first circle when I'd only recently found out I was pregnant with River, and I went to a red tent circle. It was a beautiful community of women there, and we had made this red tent as part of an arts festival. And then there were various gatherings in it over a long weekend. And so that was my first experience of sitting in circle with other women. And it was one of those life-changing moments I had never experienced, being witnessed and held in that way, where there was no judgment, there was no advice, there was no platitudes, no sympathy, just this absolute quality of presence and listening and witnessing. And it was amazing. And of course, I went out of that circle and forgot about it and carried on with life. And then I hit a moment, I can't really remember the exact moment, but there was just, I really didn't have time for anything outside of work and my baby. And so it wasn't so much that I didn't have friends, but I just didn't have the capacity to put in the time for friendships at that time. It just was really challenging. And I remembered this circle and thought, that's what I need. I need this intentional, purposeful space to gather with others. And so that's what I started doing. I just held my very first one. It was on the floor of our cafe. Simon came down and helped me, and River ran around, and we just emptied all the furniture out and just rearranged the whole room basically for this circle. I'd invited somebody to come and co-facilitate with me. Interestingly, now I was reflecting back, our theme was perimenopause, because she was a dear friend who was also a health coach and was really interested in hormones and perimenopause. And I'd never even heard of that phrase before. So that was kind of my first introduction to perimenopause as well. And that circle was amazing. And that went on then to become a monthly gathering locally. We had about 12 to 14 women come every month. And from that, I kind of developed, accidental really. People started asking me if I could teach them how to hold circles. And of course I thought, no, I don't even know what I'm doing. And I couldn't find, now there are so many courses, there are so many trainings, there's so many ways to learn how to hold circle, but it's not that long ago, but it's sort of 2016, 17. There wasn't actually that much if you searched. So I answered or heeded that call and agreed. And so then I traveled around Australia for, I think it was 2017, 2018, teaching my version. I called it Circle School. So gathering people in circle to learn how to hold circles. It was a very experiential process. And then people started reaching out to me to say, I can't come, could you hold it online? And I thought, no, of course you can't hold this online. It doesn't make any sense online. And then I said, yes, that seems to be my way. No, oh yes, okay, maybe I can do this. Let me think about it. And so I started teaching online. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So I stopped teaching in person in 2018, mostly because we relocated from Australia back to the UK for family reasons. My father was quite unwell, and it just seemed like a time to come home. I wanted River to have as much time with his grandparents as was possible, because I didn't really have that. So we came back here in 2018, and then we've just been, to be honest, we've just been finding our way. I assumed that coming home, in inverted commas, would be like that. It would just be coming home. But I'd been away for 12 years. Simon had been in Australia for over 20 years. And so it really actually didn't feel like coming home. It really felt like we'd uprooted our lives. And I think we're still working out how to plant ourselves here. We've now been in Devon for nearly 4 years, which I can't quite, I don't know. I mean, River pulls me up sometimes because I say we've just come back from Australia, and he's like, we haven't just come back, mummy, it's nearly 5 years. Like, okay, so we've been back in the UK for 5 years, and we've been in Devon for nearly 4. And yeah, still finding that place, and through that, going through perimenopause and menopause, and still teaching circles, still holding circles, and still finding, I guess I'm still seeking the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? And yes, navigating what I sometimes call wild times, sometimes called revolutionary times, the times that we find ourselves in.
I think you should write a book about this journey so far already. That was so fun to listen to. I've heard some of it before, but thank you for going over roughly your journey. And so many people have benefited from you seeking, you seeking this inquiry about, for you, what is this purpose and what is this all about? I discovered, or accidentally joined, a circle during COVID online. I signed up to do mind body medicine training through the Center for Mind Body Medicine, thinking that I was learning more tools, more techniques to help my people, my community, get more present and help themselves heal, and all the things that I'm also seeking. Now that we're talking about seeking, I'm always seeking more tools to put into my toolbox that that will help other people. And I'm sure subconsciously I'm looking for something for myself as well. Anywho, so the training, the mind body medicine training, usually happens in person, or before COVID, it was an in-person training, and everything, as we know, turned Zoomy, and we gathered, in a Zoom room, and the way the facilitator facilitated and taught these skills after, I don't know, after a few rounds, a few days. Actually, it was every day for, I believe, 6 days. So it was pretty intensive, but we didn't have anything else to do. It was actually quite lovely to have a purpose each day, a structure. So I remember the very first meeting, the facilitator would have us introduce ourselves, around the Zoom room. And then he would say, well, this is now checking in time. You can say whatever you want. You don't have to say anything. And then he went over some guidelines as to the etiquette of the group. So no sharing of opinions, no advice, no, just sort of, if you're not talking, you're not talking. And when you're talking about yourself. You're not telling, Mitli, this is what I think you should do, unless somebody is asking deliberately. And that was really the first time that I experienced anything like that. And the first few rounds, the first couple days, you could sense people were hesitant to share
Mm.
very much because a lot of us never experience that sort of exposure, vulnerability, being held in this safe space before. And then once we got used to it, it became one of the most powerful things I've experienced because it really felt like you're being seen and heard and completely no judgment
Mm.
or advice. It was really remarkable. And there were moments when it felt so uncomfortable that I couldn't say anything, you know?
Mm.
And it passes. Like that discomfort is very present and very strong when you feel like you want to say something or you want to share your feelings towards that person who's talking, who might be really vulnerable and very emotional. And you sit with it and it passes, and then you move on to the next person. Anyway, just to share that I think the world of the art of circling, is that what we call it?
Yes, I think that's a beautiful term for it.
Yeah. And I so appreciate what you do for practitioners as well as non-practitioners who get to live that experience. Um, so little that's my little share, Midley, because we're a circle of two right now.
Absolutely.
Um, I would love for you to do a little, I feel like I just, did like a little introduction, but from your experience and the way that you hold your circles, can you share with us and listeners what that looks like and what that means and why do you think it's such a wonderful I don't know if it's a technique, it's a wonderful experience.
Mm. Yes, thank you. And I think you did. I think you just described it beautifully. It is all of those things I think that you spoke to in your experience of it. So when I think of a circle, the questions I'm always asking, it's an intentional space. So I'm always my inquiry is, as I said, I'm always seeking. So my inquiry when it comes to circles is what is the intention for this circle and what meaningful purpose is it fulfilling? So from that perspective, they are very different to simply gathering with friends or even gathering around a kitchen table. There's elements in daily life that we may bring in circle practices because of the way we gather and the way we share. But when it comes to actually being in a circle, there's an intention to gather in that way, and the circle is serving a purpose. And as you mentioned, we have guidelines or agreements so that everybody understands how the process of circle works. So it's a way of meeting our expectations so that we're not thinking, I don't know how this works, what are we doing? It's very clear that this is the process that we're going through, and there's an invitation there to really trust the process of circle. And so some of those things that you mentioned in particular is, people, things like one person speaks at a time. So whoever is speaking is, sorry, I just realized my laptop's not plugged in. You're about to lose me. There we go. So whoever is speaking has the floor, so to speak. And the role of everybody else in the circle in that moment is to listen and to witness and to be deeply listening. So there's an invitation when we're in circle is that we're listening to hear, we're listening to witness. We're not taking our time thinking about what we're going to say. So it can be a very interesting experience. It can be quite a learning curve because we're not waiting to respond. We're not waiting to offer our opinion. We're not waiting to offer our perspective. We are holding space for one another to really hear what each of us is sharing. And then when it comes to our turn, it's our opportunity to do the same thing. And in the culture or the overculture that we may call it, that is a bit of a learning curve because it's not necessarily how we're used to interacting with one another. There's often an expectation that we should respond to what somebody else has shared, that we need to say something in reply to that. So that's simple act of speaking without being interrupted, without receiving any advice or feedback on what you've shared, was for me one of the most incredible experiences. It just changed my perspective of how we can engage with one another, what those interactions can look like. And circles will often, or women's circles in particular, the women's circle movement will often also involve shared ceremony and shared ritual. And I think in our bones and our blood, we realize that we're reclaiming something that for many of us, especially in Western cultures, have really lost. So just the simplicity of sharing in a sacred space and really feeling that sense that what we're doing here is sacred, that there's a real reverence for each other and a real reverence for life, and whatever the theme is, or what, you know, the reason, that coming back to that intention and meaningful purpose that we've gathered, and having that sense of safety. You know, language can be complex, and we may not be able to guarantee, you know, 100% safety for every participant, but there is an intention to hold a safe or safer space. And by that, it means that everything that is shared in circle is held in circle. So we all understand confidentiality. And once we step out of that space, we don't talk about what happened in that space. So whatever is shared in there is offered. It's like an offering to the circle, and that's where it remains. There are, you know, the things we've already touched on in terms of not offering advice. So we don't have to filter after we've shared. We don't have to then filter other people's opinions and views. We can just sit with that, and we don't have to speak. So I mean, when it comes to your turn to share, you don't have to use words if that isn't accessible to you in that moment. Sometimes just sitting and being witnessed in silence can be exactly the most powerful experience that you needed in that moment. Sometimes being able to cry and release, again, not using words, just being able to release through our tears and being witnessed in that. And that is always an incredible experience for everybody else in circle, because when one person cries and releases, it usually has a kind of Mexican wave effect, where we all find that we can suddenly access something that needed to be released that we may not have even identified. But there's an incredible magic that happens in the collective. We both mirror each other and can access something within us that maybe we wouldn't have been able to access without that experience. So it's the, you know, there is a process to it, but it's all of these little points for me that make it magical and sacred and so life enriching. It affects every aspect of my life. When you step out of circle, there is this ripple effect in how you then meet your world on the outside of circle, how you interact with others, how you can engage with your children, how you engage with your friends, how you can engage with your movements, how you can engage with people, because we learn how to be in space with one another without needing to constantly project our own experience, our own perspectives onto each other. Doesn't mean we're perfect. We can still find, you know, people annoying, and we might not always hold space brilliantly outside of that space, outside of the circle space. But there's a deep learning and remembering that happens in circle, which I think only has an incredible, you know, positive effect in the rest of our lives.
Just remembering my time with you and our group during the retreat and that circle, and how memorable. And I can't say I remember anything specific, really, at all. It's almost like, you're right, the stories and the tears and the laughters were left within the circle and that beautiful mandala that we had. But my body remembers what I felt and what it felt like, you know, and that in itself is priceless, really, to have shared. Yeah. And truly medicinal, you know, it's in itself, the act of sitting in a circle. And like you said, we as in our humanity, our ancestors, have been doing this for thousands of years. So yeah. I okay, I have to like come back, because my soul just went back to our circle, our retreat. Let's talk about holding circles for women in particular. And that's a lot of your work anyway, right? Is women's circles.
Yeah, it's definitely where I started.
Mhm.
And I think I often refer to the like a women's circle movement because in the time that I've been holding circles, there definitely feels like it's a movement that has momentum now. There are more and
Mhm.
more people holding circles. I happen to live somewhere where there's a lot of circles on offer. And I
Mm.
know that's not the same everywhere because people reach out to me looking for them. And it's funny because I've always seemed to live in places where there's a lot of women's circles or community circles where circle is quite a normal part of life.
Mm.
So I think I must be drawn to those areas unconsciously. I like, oh yeah, this is where I belong.
Mhm.
But in terms of literally a global movement, there definitely are a lot more than when I started holding circles. You can Google it, or just looking at the number of trainings that are available or courses that are available to train circle holders now. It is quite phenomenal, the increase in that. And
Mhm.
so I think my work, it's funny, circles are such a calling for me. They're such a part of my life now, but it wasn't anything that I ever knew anything about until I attended that first Red Tent Circle. So, the Red Tent movement is a circle movement on its own in terms of women holding local red tents and really honoring the phases of a woman's life, and the cycles of women's lives. Then spiritual women's circles, which I think is very much a reclamation, looking for a version of women's spirituality where we can have access to the divine, whatever that looks like for us, without it being mediated by somebody else. Because for a long time, women have been marginalized in faiths and religions and sacred and spiritual practices, and being told that, yes, we have to have someone between us and our connection with the divine. So women's circles, spiritual women's circles, is one way I think women have sought to reclaim that, to reclaim ritual, to reclaim ceremony in a way that feels accessible.
Mhm.
And into the terms of women's history overall of oppression and marginalization within our overculture, circles are a revolutionary movement. They're providing these spaces where women can connect and share their stories and listen for those moments of similarity, noticing what is universal in our experience. And so that can really be on any theme. We could have corporate women talking about the gender pay gap. When you start to hear what other people are earning and understand what else is happening in corporations and institutions, can be a very powerful way to gather women in those contexts as well. And so my journey with women's circles, I feel, is kind of flowing through all of that. I started in the Red Tent movement, then I started holding women's circles for women who had never been to circle before. That was kind of where I wanted to invite people in to have that experience and then start their own circle or find a circle that met their needs. And then through that, it was coming to particularly supporting well-being practitioners who wanted to hold circles as part of their business model. And the reason for that is because I think circles they're very much community-based gatherings, but we do need people to step into the role and be willing to hold them. And so
Mhm.
well-being practitioners, for me, are uniquely placed to do that because
Mhm.
they're already offering ways to support women, to empower women, to hold women, to witness women. And so bringing circles into their offerings is a kind of dual functionality for them. It offers something really beautiful for the community to gather, but it also gives people an opportunity to engage with them, to meet them, to understand their work, and perhaps to work with them in a different context, whether that's one-on-one or whatever those modalities are that they practice. And so that's really where I've been focused for the last few years. And now things are shifting yet again. And I'm having more and more inquiries from actually coming into institutions and corporations and seeing whether, how do we bring circles into these spaces
Mhm.
as a tool of facilitation, which I was very resistant to a few years ago. I didn't think it was a space that I wanted to enter. But one of the things actually coming back, relocating back to the UK and refinding my roots here, that has been, and I think part of perimenopause as well, has really been kind of bringing back those disparate parts of me. So the lawyer in me, which I completely rejected as, you know, something that I'd done in the past and it wasn't part of this part of my journey, was actually, I've reclaimed that now, because there are some really good things that I learned as a lawyer, some things that I know and things that I can do. And so kind of bringing these different aspects of my skills and my experience. And it's somehow now it makes more sense to go, well, actually, yes, I can work in these organizations. I can facilitate these spaces in places where we might not necessarily expect to see circles. So that, I feel that's where my path is going at the moment, as well as more writing. Yeah. Did that answer your question? I can't remember what the question was now.
Yes, but I'm going to pause a moment. There's a little noise, extra noise, and I wonder if it might be your hair touching the microphone.
Oh, maybe.
Let's see. Say something.
Is that better?
Yes.
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 Keep my hair out of the way.
Yeah, that's okay. Yes, that answered me a lot, and there's so many more questions to follow up. But I do want to focus back in on, selfishly, on this midlife chapter that you and I are in as mothers, as practitioners, as caretakers. And I know that you hold a mother and son circle in locally in an in-person experience. Could you talk a little bit about how you think that doing that, being part of a circle of other women, and I'm just only guessing that some of them are also midlife, you know, kind of this next chapter sort of phase of their life. How do you feel that that helps nurture us in particular of during this time?
So yes, the in-person circle that I hold, as you said, is for mothers and sons. So we gather monthly together. And the idea behind that was, as a circle holder and someone who's walked this path in women's circles, I had noticed this, again, this real movement towards women and girls circles, or mother and girls circles, and particularly to honor a girl's journey into womanhood, their first period, education around menstruation, all of these beautiful things. And it took me a while. And I was like, oh, I'm a mother to a son. What's available then for our boys? And the idea came to me because River has been coming to Circle with me since he was tiny, because I started them when he was tiny. So he doesn't always stay, but he's been very much part of Circle life. Circles have always been in my life. So they've always been in his life since he came into my life. And I just started to think about this idea of, why can't we have mother and son circles? And what would that look like? And what would be the intention, and what would be the meaningful purpose of that? And it seemed really important to me, in the culture that we're currently living in a world where male violence is so high. You know, perpetrators of violence tend to be male against, and particularly violence against women. And we're looking at the uprising of influencers, whose name I don't want to mention because I don't want them to be on your podcast, but these very misogynistic influencers who are having an incredible effect and impact on young boys, to the point where, you know, the schools here are having to have policies as to how to address that within the classroom, how to protect female teachers, women within school spaces. And then, of course, just looking at the, you know, the world that we're in, still very much a patriarchal and misogynistic space in many, many different areas of life. And as our role as mothers, what is our role in that? So that was kind of where I started from. What is my role, hoping that I raise a son who understands feminism, who understands what the patriarchy is and how it affects him, as well as how it affects others who are oppressed by that system. And what is it that we want the world to look like? What is the place? What are these boys? What world are these boys growing into? What is their contribution to make? How can they feel safe and nurtured and supported, and really tend to that bond between mother and son? alongside, you know, boys' work and men's work, and what fathers or male caregivers are doing with their boys as well. So it wasn't to replace anything else. It was a way of gathering us together, and also for the mothers to be able to share our journey of raising boys at this particular time in the world's story, and what is it that we are hoping for them, and how can we support them through this. So the boys are aged about 9, 10 up to 12. And so I have a feeling this particular group, we will keep going. And we're about to introduce, I'm mentoring someone through to create circles for younger boys. So we're hoping this will sort of start about 6 or 7, and we start to bring them through until, well, as long as we can persuade them to come. So,
I was going to say, I was going to ask, how do the boys react / respond to being in the circle with their moms?
It's been amazing. They are amazing.
Mm.
I did a pilot program last year for 12 months, and really the boys blew me away. Their willingness, so they were 8 to 11 at that point, and sort of the group that I share grows with River, so he's now 10, so that's a kind of, they're growing up together. Their capacity to be present, their willingness to share, their willingness to take part in the activities, the feedback from the boys just melts my heart, what they get out of it. So some of the highlights for the boys are the time with their mothers. So as part of our circle, we have group sharing and group activities, but there's also quite a lot of time where the mother and sons do something together. That might be sharing around the topic or doing an activity together, exploring things that they want to take out of circle and implement in the home. So last month or this month, our theme was play. So we did a lot of exploration around what do the boys want to do with us? What does play still look like as they're getting older as well? What is play? And where is our resistance or reluctance to play with them? So what could that dynamic now look like? What are the sort of things we can do together? It was so powerful. And it's hard for me to describe it, because I think it exceeded my expectations. I kind of thought we'd have to push the boys to do it, that it would become a bit of a they would be reluctant to come but agree to come. But actually the boys really lead it. They are very enthusiastic. We have guidelines in place, and in the same way, there is no requirement on them. There's no, you don't have to sit still, you don't have to be quiet. We do have guidelines around sharing and one person speaking at a time, but they can still respond as they need to. So they can get up and walk around, they can draw or doodle or play with something while other people are sharing. So we really adapt it to who is there. And it's been the most rewarding and enriching circle experience, I think, that I've had the privilege of holding. And the duality is River and I go together. And so that has its moments as the facilitator, but also wanting to really take part in it. And I think there are some moments for River that he probably doesn't get 100% of my attention in the same way that the other mother and boys do. So I am quite conscious of that, and perhaps at some point bringing in a facilitator so that I can simply be a member of the circle. But there's been so much overall enthusiasm and interest from others also wanting to start these circles. And I think these work particularly well for that longer journey where you commit to coming monthly. Right. Because we get to see the boys develop, and then the relationship between the mothers. We're also sharing openly about our experiences, and sometimes where possible, it doesn't happen every time, but there's also time usually for a mother's circle within that while the boys play or do something else. So it's definitely a work in progress, and I'm still developing how that could look, in order to mentor others to do it. But I think from my experience, the most important thing is once you have that structure in place, you're really following the boys' lead and letting them very much take that role within it as to what they're willing to do. And then, I'm so in awe of their capacity to name their feelings, their capacity to name what is difficult, their willingness to talk things through in circle. It's been absolutely amazing, truly amazing. And this is a group, I have to say, this group of boys in particular, they are a group of homeschooled boys or in alternative schools.
Mhm.
So it has that quality to it as well.
Yeah. Just thinking about how that if you can spread the mother son or mother daughter or some sort of parent child circles around the world, what impact that could have,
Mm,
to societies at large, because it really starts, everything starts from that unit, right? The parent and
yeah.
child unit. So keep doing it, Midley. Do it faster.
Well, I think there's a lot of interest in doing that. I think it is really important work. I've got a connection with somebody in Australia, Western Australia, who are also doing, just started doing mother and son work. So we're going to have a call and just start to explore that. And what could this look like? How can we help others do this? How can we create resources that make this accessible to as many people as possible?
Mhm.
And I guess coming back in a little slightly different to the work that I do with wellbeing practitioners, which is very much part of a business model, and
Mhm.
using this sort of ancient technology, if that's what we call circles. And this feels very much like, for me, it's my community project in terms of how do we make this very accessible, both the process and the architecture, and really support mothers who want to step into that role, so that we don't have to bring in facilitators, that there is that skill sharing within the community of people who are willing to do that role within their community. I see, this is what I was thinking about the circle holder. This is probably the big dream for me within communities, that your circle holder is considered a community role, so that every community would have, I don't know, depending on the size of the community, one or half a
Mhm.
dozen or a dozen circle holders. And when that may be for initiations and rites of passage and community celebrations and all of this,
Mhm.
or it may be because there is a dispute within the community. And so
Mhm.
we bring everybody together in circle and use
Mhm.
that tool, use that technology, use that process to give
Mhm.
everyone an opportunity to share what their experience was, and to allow that process to take effect, because it's so powerful. But we live in a system, and as a former litigation lawyer, I'm very, very familiar with the adversarial systems that we live in. And
Mhm.
so to break those down, to dismantle those and create something new, if we can come back to things like circle, we can start to see what else is possible. Because often you hit that barrier of people going, well, is there a better way? There isn't a better way. There's a reason we've developed adversarial systems.
Mhm.
But of course there's a better way. We just have to look to living Indigenous cultures to see that there are better ways. And so finding a way that without appropriating, but
Mhm.
learning from these ancient techniques and technologies, and then looking at how we can apply them to this moment in the world story, this moment that we're living through. How can we engage with them? How can we embrace them? How can we let them evolve to meet the needs of our communities now?
Mhm. Well, ancient technique of circling meets modern technique of zooming. We
Yeah.
can, you know, why not meld the two and really make a huge difference? Oh,
Yeah.
so much. So I'm excited thinking about it, and thank you for doing this and sharing and spreading the wings. I want to come back to more personal things as another, I believe we're the same age, 1975? No? Yes?
Oh, I'm 74.
Oh, you are so much wiser than me. How are you doing in this little moment in time of your life?
I am doing well now. I am now officially postmenopausal,
Mm,
and
congratulations.
thank you. I am very excited to be on this side of it. I actually think I always wanted to be on this side of it. I think from quite young, I was ready to get to this age and stage of life. There's something, I actually just finished, I had a year with a beautiful woman called Kate Codrington, who's written a book actually called Second Spring. And she describes herself as a menopause doula, among other things. She's got an incredible
Mm,
bio. So I signed up with her for her 12-month menopause doula service, which I have just had my last session with her. And it was so interesting to look back on that year. So previous to that, I'd had 2 years in what I would call the trenches of perimenopause. You know, the work for me, the sort of mental health aspects were quite severe. I had particularly, I had those moments, and I've shared this and it really resonates with people, but in the moment it's really terrifying. Things thinking that maybe I had early dementia because I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't string my words together. Everything that I had done professionally and in my business that I really prided myself on, and was what people gave feedback to me about, you're brilliant at doing that. And those things were particularly being able to teach, being able to speak live to camera, just being able to just, go speak about circles. Okay, I'm off. Everything was there. I could read books and quote to you sections and remember research studies. It was just all accessible. I could manage my diary in my head, like I knew my schedule. That all went. I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember my schedule. I couldn't even remember my schedule. If I looked at my diary in the morning, I would have forgotten what I was meant to be doing halfway through the morning. I had to keep checking. I had to write endless lists of things, otherwise I would just forget. I couldn't find words, so I was having to describe things to people. I'd be like, the thing that you do the thing in the thing. Like, it was just terrifying. Luckily, I work in an environment, a world where I had lots of people to talk to and held circles. I ran a 12-month circle program called the Crone Coven and gathered with other women, either in perimenopause or quite a few beautiful women in there who were post-menopause, who were able to say that, and one of them was a menopause expert, so she was able to confirm that this was all, part of, or can be part of that journey. I had some quite dark moments as well, which were also quite frightening, and very, very grateful that I did understand that I was in perimenopause. And therefore that was enough of a lifeline to know that I was going through a phase, a stage, an initiation into the second half of life. And so although it was challenging, I had enough awareness that I was willing to keep going through, I was willing to keep meeting it and try and understand the opportunities that it was given. And it's such a cliche in many spaces and healing spaces, but it did really make me think of the butterfly and the caterpillar just dissolving to goo, and then those imaginal cells reforming themselves for the caterpillar to be birthed. And we can use it in lots of contexts, but I think perimenopause, it really, really fits, because for me in particular, so much falls away. Who you think you are, your identity, what you think you're here to do, anything you've ever done that you wished you hadn't done or isn't healed or closed, seem to come back and require my attention and be like, you need to look at this part, this needs some love and attention. So it was challenging, but I was grateful that I understood that I was in a process, and that process would come to a climax at some point, and I would transition out of that. And I think the last 12 months of this journey with Kate was actually perfect timing. I didn't really know why. I just was like, yes, I'm going to do this now. So that would have been probably year 3 for me of perimenopausal symptoms. And of course, some people have much shorter, some people have much longer. And so that was an amazing journey, because I was thinking when I first met you, that was when I just started this, and I was suffering from facial paralysis.
Yes.
And that was actually my first session with Kate was the day after that happened. So I arrived onto this call for this 12-month journey, and I was like, I'm literally frozen. I think I've done all this work and I've come through all this, and now what is this? And so that journey with her was from that moment of frozen to unfreezing, unsticking. In that process, I also had severe osteoarthritis in my left hip, which had just got worse and worse through perimenopause. And through this, that, yeah, it's like, sorry, when I look back, I'm slightly in awe of the last 12 months as well, because there's so much healing that can take place if you're willing to listen.
Mm.
And my hip was always a huge part of that. I knew there was a message in there, but I could never quite work it out. And through the grief work that we did through the Sacred Grief Retreat last year, the work that I did with Kate, it was a week, 2 weeks after we had that retreat that I got notification that my hip replacement was to be done. And it was really quick. Had been like a couple of months since I'd seen the specialist, and the current wait list here is 2.5 years. So it felt like an absolute miracle. And it was like that whole process, whatever I needed to release had been released. And so I have a bright, shiny new hip that works, and I can walk and do all these incredible things. So again, for me, coming out and being postmenopausal, but physically more able to do things than I was for the last few years through that, other than seeing a chiropractor. By the end, my physical capacity, as you witnessed, had become very, very limited. So yeah.
You were given new wings.
Yeah. It's amazing. And a real lesson in appreciation of what you have. That was one of my biggest things as my hip started to deteriorate, and as I was going through my perimenopause and not being able to remember things, and it's like, oh wow, we take so much. I took so much for granted. I took so much of my capacity and my abilities for granted. And I'm really deepening into a practice of recognizing what I can do and what I have, and honoring and acknowledging that in the awareness that that may not always be the case. Because in this, I think it was my first sort of year of high, perimenopause journey was a nightmare. It was a nightmare when I look back. So at the beginning, when I realized I was in perimenopause, I was like, here it is. Ended up in hospital with bacterial meningitis. Wow. It's like an emergency awfulness. I mean, I did obviously survive that, but it was all very close. So the journey for me was very physical and emotional and spiritual and all the things. And now I'm here. My energy is back, and I guess that passion for life is back. And what can we do now? Like, I have much more awareness about the fragility of life, but also the enormous privilege it is that to have one. To still be here.
Oh, that's such a wonderful capture of what I'm personally feeling and going through, and so many of my patients and clients, in this similar time frame. I heard somewhere that instead of thinking of it as a midlife crisis, we can think of it as a midlife chrysalis.
I like that.
And that's exactly what you were talking about. Is it feels like we used to have this freedom, being able to do things and confidence, and knew what we were here to do. And all of a sudden we got cocooned into I don't know, like almost like a trap, confused, in pain, doubting a lot of things, plus not remembering anything. You were basically describing what I'm going through, Mitli. I go, oh, that is exactly why I do the thing, like, the thing where the thing, and thankfully a lot of people know what I'm talking about. Yes, and for each of us, that chrysalis, the time frame is different, but knowing that it's limited, and in fact, what we're there to do in the cocoon, the chrysalis, is reconfiguring and almost deciding what kind of butterfly we're going to look like when we do come out, as a much more appreciative and grateful butterfly who may be a lot more intentional about where to go and how to exist, instead of the way we were before, where, as that's what happens in youth, is we just sort of take things for granted and not seeing the big picture. Yeah. So thank you for being on the other side so that a lot of us can follow with faith, I guess, and confidence that it's this is where we're supposed to be and that it's okay to go through it.
Yeah. I hope that that's one of the wonderful things with your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the amount of information available to us
Mm-hmm.
now, it really does. Because if circles are having a moment, menopause is definitely having a moment.
It
And
is.
sometimes that can feel a bit overwhelming, and some of the marketing and, you know, making things pink and telling us it's menopause shampoo. I'm not interested in any of that. But hearing other women's stories, which is
100%.
one of the beautiful things that Circle is a vehicle for, but
Yeah.
in podcasts, in books, just gathering in these ways where, because if we can, it's one of those things, is if we hear somebody else's version,
Yep.
so much of what is personal is universal. The individual circumstances and experiences, of course, personal, but there's so much in there that is collective, that we are experiencing as people at this stage of life. And that's so powerful. And, you know, particularly the piece around not remembering anything or having very dark thoughts, because that can be really frightening at the time. And you can easily be dismissed still by the more traditional medical, called conventional medical system, although I think that's getting better, hopefully. So having other women that you can speak to, other people who are going through menopause that you can speak to, is invaluable, because it puts your experience in a wider context of a collective experience. And I think that's when it starts to be, okay, this could be an empowering part of life, with its ups and downs and its darkness and its potential, I suppose, for what comes next. And yes, an honoring of life and an appreciation that I didn't have before. And an acceptance as well, but maybe that's the way it's meant to be. Like, I don't know, but maybe that's how it's meant to be. That's kind of the purpose of this.
Yeah. I have to remind myself that when I am doubting what's happening right now, why is this happening to me? Why me? Why now? I have to come back to, this is one of the beauty of the coaching methods that I use. It's not just this particular method that I use, but I think it's just the general reminder, or maybe it's just a thought process that we can all remember is, well, it is happening. And fighting what is happening is always going to make us more miserable.
Yeah.
So it is happening. Those are, what are the facts? And then realizing that you can just ease into the moment, accepting. You don't have to be happy about it, but accepting that it's happening. And now what? And I think the gathering, the sharing of womanhood is just that, just recognizing and remembering that what is happening. We are in perimenopause. We are dealing with menopausal symptoms. We are, turning 50 and 60. Those are facts. And fighting that, not wanting to be there, is going to make our stress level way higher, much higher than necessary. So, just coming back to the Byron Katie's quote, her wisdom is, when we fight what's happening right now, we lose 100% of the time. Yeah. So just makes life that much more interesting. And speaking of which, and I want to be respectful of your time, a couple more questions before I let you go. One is, what are you excited about right now?
What a beautiful question. I have to say, I am I'm excited about life right now. That journey was very difficult at times. And so now the joy that I have in being here and knowing that each day has the opportunity for connection, for activism, for contribution, really means a lot to me, and so much has fallen away, and so much is still falling away in terms of my business and my choices. But the exciting thing is that it feels like it's like a canvas again. It's like, okay, what do I want this now to look like? I have a lot more choices in how I want to live going forward, and what is my path of contribution at this moment.
Yay. So there's exciting things around the corner for people going through perimenopause.
Yes.
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 If people want to work with you or find out more about what you do, what you're doing, what sort of retreats or offerings you have, how can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Circle School with Mitli, or my website is mitlisouthey.com, and I'm on Substack as The Circle Project. So that's where I am writing about life and circles through that lens of intersectional feminism, myths and stories, women gathering together, and trying to find a kind of what Amanda Scott calls a through-topia. So rather than the dystopia or the utopia, like how are we coming through this time? And that's where I think circles have a real role to play. So yeah, please come and find me. Those are 3 places you'll find me.
Great. I'll put all those links in the show notes. And I know I'm going to see you again very soon because I just love England, and I will come find you. Thank
Brilliant.
you
I look
so much.
to it.
Oh, thank you for being here, Mitli, and for all the things that you do.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was so much fun.